try not to use acronyms, but just wave at me, but IB, International Baccalaureate, uses acronyms for everything, so don't be afraid if I'm saying something you don't understand to just wave at me. I've been involved with the International Baccalaureate for about 23 years now, and I started as a high school English teacher in kind of the same thing that you're talking about in terms of was really looking for a way to challenge students beyond what even we were doing at that time. And I taught advanced placement. I taught everything from the really high college-bound students all the way to those very low-performing students who were struggling to stay in school. And I can tell you that my journey with the International Baccalaureate program has really changed me, not only professionally, but even personally. And I hope that you're going to see all those qualities as we go through today. So for me also, I was thinking about that what would you be thinking about, and Rick has already brought it up. What is IB, and why would we consider doing this? And hopefully, by the time we're done this evening, you'll have a pretty good sense of how to answer both of those questions. Okay? So what exactly is IB? I want to give you a little bit about that by starting with really the program models and going through each of the pieces. That the IB organization spent a lot of time in developing, and this is kind of the second version of the models, to capture in visual form what all of the pieces are. And the first thing that I want you to notice is in the center of both the primary years program, which is a pre-K through typically 5th grade program, and then the middle years program is a 5-year program spanning from 6th grade through 10th grade. You will be doing the first 3 years of that program, 6th grade through 8th grade. Okay? And they spend a lot of time to really get at, through these models, the focus of the program. And you'll notice if you look at the center of each of these two models, we have the student. And that is because both models, all of the programs, are very student-focused, student-centered. So we start with the middle, and you may not be able to read it from where you are, but it says the IB Learner Profile. So the IB Learner Profile are 10 character traits that the IB program believes in order to make truly internationally minded students, students who see the world and understand the world, that these would be the 10 characteristics that we would want to focus on. And we would be using those within our classes, and again, to supplement what you already are doing. So you could see the top 5 are predominantly cognitive-based characteristics, thinking characteristics. So we start with inquirers, that we want to teach students to explore, to investigate, to wonder, okay, to ask questions so that they can become lifelong learners. And in that process, we want them to become knowledgeable. We want them to understand how to seek knowledge and learn knowledge and understand knowledge. So we go from inquiring to knowledgeable. We want them to be thinkers, okay, to consider possibilities and to think, the critical thinking skills that Rick talked about. Communicators, and communication in multiple modes, so that they have to learn to be good writers, good speakers. They also have to study a second language, so that the International Baccalaureate values also being multilingual, so that you have an understanding of other languages. And then also being reflective, that built into both programs, students are constantly being asked to reflect on what they're learning. How are they changing? How are they expanding? How are they growing? Okay, then we move down to, and I'm sure these will sit well with what you would want for your children, to be open-minded, to consider possibilities, to look at different viewpoints, to be principled in action, to understand what it means to be principled, to be ethical, okay? To be caring. So built into the program, there is community service work. The kids learn from very little that they need to care for each other, care for their communities, care for the environment, to be caretakers. And then the risk-taking and courageous doesn't mean that they should take foolish risks. It means that we know to grow, sometimes we have to push ourselves out of our comfort area. So that's what it means to be courageous, to realize that sometimes learning is uncomfortable, and you have to be willing to take that step and move beyond what is always feeling comfortable. Okay? And then finally, balanced, and especially in today's world, where kids are so heavily involved in so many things, and they have so much going on with technology. How do we treat and teach them to be balanced? And one of the things that you should know, especially for your community, is that balanced also includes, and IB acknowledges this, that spiritual can be part of the characteristics for being balanced. So it's how do we become balanced in all aspects, both in educational, intellectual, emotional, physical, being active, serving our community, and then also could include a spiritual dimension. So through both programs, the learner profile, they will start very young with the earliest students you have, and these traits will be worked through the curriculum and through the classroom with the students the whole time that they are here in the IB program. Because what the IB organization says is if you have all of these characteristics, then you are an internationally minded person. That if everyone in the world exhibited these characteristics, we would have a much better world. So I want you also to know the original mission of the IB program. It started in the late 60s through the international schools, mostly for children of diplomats who were traveling from one country to another. And one of the people who put the initial IB together believed that it was really through education that we could, in fact, impact the world and create a better world. So part of the mission statement is that we are about creating a better world. So I just want you to see that this is what they believe those characteristics could contribute to. So the learner profile is a big part of the program, and it's the center of both models. As we go on, you'll notice that there are specific approaches to teaching, and Rick already mentioned those. This is an inquiry-based program, both of them, both the elementary and the middle programs, meaning that we teach students to investigate, to explore, to wonder. We foster their curiosity, okay? And they investigate, and as teachers, we investigate with them. We're not the ones who hold all the information. We are guiding their investigations and showing them how to do that. Okay? Concept-based. What this means is that we, and you'll see as we go forward, this will become more clear, is that we work with students on the big understandings, okay? Not just the factual information. What does it mean to understand something? All right? What are the big ideas? Because if you think back to your elementary education right now, and I were to ask you, what did you learn in 3rd grade? How many of you could tell me what you learned? 4th grade. 8th grade. Most of the factual information that we learn or that we are taught is forgotten. But what remains are the big ideas that those facts taught us. And so the focus in this approach is how do we focus on those big ideas, because we know that's what will remain with students after they have forgotten all of the facts. And you know as well as I do, I don't know what age students get smartphones anymore, but I see I have 2 granddaughters. One is not quite 4 and the other is 6 in 1st grade, also in a primary years program. And I see them on tablets and phones. They know how to get information. at very young ages. They don't need to come to school to get information, which is for many of us why we went to school. They could get information much more than any teacher could ever give them. What we need to give them is what to do with all of this information we're getting bombarded with. How to weigh it, how to know what's good information and what's not good information, how to make sense of it. Okay? So that is why this is a concept-based program, and you'll see from some of many names that you may even recognize what they say, kids today in the 21st century, what do they really need from education? So this is the teaching approach. There's also a learning approach, and that is that we have to teach kids skills, and they break the skills into 5 categories. So they're thinking skills. They need to be critical thinkers. They need to be creative thinkers. And then they also need to know how to transfer what they've learned to new and unfamiliar situations. We work with them on research skills. Okay, so how do they handle all the information and how do they find good information? Communication skills, which we've talked about. Social skills. Okay, how do they get along with each other? How do they work in collaborative groups? In most companies today, very rarely do you work alone. And if you can't work with others, right? And in today's world, because of the internet, they may very well be working with people around the world from different cultural backgrounds who speak different languages. So they need to know how they're going to interact, because very likely their colleagues are not going to be sitting in the booth next to them. They might be somewhere else in the world. And then lastly, self-management, which especially at this age is so important. Okay? So you have the learner profile, you have this set of skills, and then you've seen the overall philosophy of the approach. But in addition, you'll notice at the top in the primary program it says action, and then it says action and service. The emphasis here is when we learn something, when we come to understand something, we should do something with that knowledge. The knowledge is not for its own sake. And that action could either be mental action or actually physical action. It could be I'm going to think differently. Or it could be I'm going to actually take action and do something. So students are constantly being looked at, now that I've learned this, what do I do with it? How does it impact me? Okay? So that is why both programs have a focus on action, and as they move up, also looking at how do I serve my community? Because they need to learn that they should not just be takers, they need to also serve each other and serve their community. I'll talk a little bit about the subjects. So this is what you'll recognize the most. In the PYP, they do language, and they start their second language from the very beginning of the primary program. So they will be learning a second language, as well as English. They will also be doing what you know as social studies, history, and geography. They will be obviously studying mathematics. They will be studying the arts, the sciences, and physical, social, so basically PE and health. So that should look very familiar to you. The IB does not dictate the content of those subjects. Okay, so you would use your own content. Okay, because this is a program that is implemented around the entire world. So they do not dictate the content of what is taught. They talk about how it should be taught, not what is taught. In the middle years program, you have those same subjects, but a few are added. We call it language and literature, which is English, because now they're really starting to get into the study of literature. language acquisition, by the time they're in middle school, the goal of IB isn't just to know a few phrases in a second language, it's to be able to communicate in that second language. Individuals and society is basically social studies. You have mathematics, sciences, PE and health, the arts, and then they've added this other one called design, which is basically a problem-solving class. How do you identify problems and develop solutions to solve those problems, test out those solutions, and then evaluate whether they're effective or not? Probably one of the best life skills any of us could have. And that's taught into the class called design. You'll also notice that there are two culminating projects. At the end of 5th grade, as a class, they do a PYP exhibition. As a group, they decide what they want to explore and what they want to do. It's completely self-directed and guided by the teachers. Okay? At the end of 8th grade, your students will do what's called a community project. And they will do that either alone or in pairs or as many as 3. So they get to decide whether they want to work alone or with 1 or 2 other students. And the focus of that project is reaching into the community, identifying a need in the community, and then meeting that need and working for the community. Okay? So that is the projects. Then the last piece that we'll focus on here is you will see these 2 terms. In the PYP program, most of the content is taught what they call transdisciplinary approach, so that they understand how social studies and science and math work together, not just separately. That they begin to see the world as it really is, which is, right, in your day, I don't think part of your day is science and part of your day is math and part of your day is literature. Your day is integrated. Those things all work together. And that's what life is about. So that is how the approach in the primary. Now when we get to middle school and the kids start getting older, they need to explore those disciplines at some greater depth. So they do study those, and we call it interdisciplinary, so that they're constantly making connections between various subjects. So they're not completely isolated and separate. Okay. That's the big picture. Now we're going to kind of dig into a little bit about that. But do you have any really quick questions about the models before I go any further? And if I'm going to cover your question, I'll let you know so we won't spend time on it. But does anyone have just a clarifying question about the models?
Where does history fall in?
History would be either in social studies or individuals in society.
American history?
Oh yeah, all U.S. schools teach American history. It's required by every state. So again, remember, the IB does not dictate the content. Okay.
Do you monitor it though?
What do you mean?
Do you monitor what they're teaching us, or are you tracking it or anything?
No, I mean, they look at the unit planner and you'll see that, but they do not dictate what the content is. What is part of the philosophy is that students will be exposed to multiple perspectives. Okay? So that in addition to U.S. history, they should also be doing world history. Well, I don't know of any school in the U.S. that doesn't also do world history. Right? We are members of the world, so we need to study what's happening in the world. Yes.
So it's when doing all these newer things, which sound good. Is there a trade-off somewhere? Is there any measurable way to know what those trade-offs are in terms of?
We'll get into that and we'll
Okay.
look at that. And one of the things that Rick mentioned, which is really important, is that both programs are based on the best practices in education. So my last official job was I was director of instruction and curriculum at Summit County in Colorado. And I went to lots of educational conferences that had nothing to do with IB. They were just educational conferences that educators in schools all over the country would attend. And every topic that was presented and what we should be doing just in education, I could sit there and say, the IB has that built into it. So this is really a framework of best practices in education, but it doesn't dictate content. So let's go on and take a look and then keep thinking of possible questions. I want to show you this just as a framework of why it is important, because I gave you a little bit of what is IB. Now I want to talk a little bit about why is this type of teaching really important. So a quick little history lesson that I'm sure you're familiar with. That 18th century was very much the agricultural age. We were mostly farmers. In the 19th century, factories sprung up, and we moved to the industrial age. This, by the way, is where our schools were developed, which is why we still have what many people call a factory model of education, where all kids enter at a certain age, they sit in a class together, they move through, and it's very much what most educators call the factory model of education, because it was developed during this time period. Most of you, I would imagine, not all of you, but most of you, like me, are products of the 20th century education. That was the information age. And if you think back to your schooling, what school was about was learning information. And if you were good at learning information, you were put in honors classes or accelerated classes where you learned more information at a faster pace. And we were tested on how much information we could remember. Okay? Students got grades based on when you took a test. If you could remember almost all of the information, you got a 98% of it or 100% of it, you got an A. If you couldn't remember much, then you maybe got a D or maybe even an F. It was all information based. What they're saying now, because of so much information, is that we're really now in the conceptual age. Kids today, to be successful for their future, need to know what to do with all this information. They are bombarded with so much. And those who are going to be most successful in the 21st century are the ones who could process information and make sense of information and see connections among various types of information. Knowing stuff doesn't mean anything, because we could all, if you've ever been with friends and someone challenges, everybody pulls their phone out and we do a quick fact check, right? We all can check the facts very quickly. Information is readily available. We carry it in our pocket. Okay? This has to therefore change the way we approach education. Because that wasn't the case. When I was in school, my teacher was the one who had most of the information. And when I went home, the only place I could find information were in the dusty World Book encyclopedias. Okay? Kids today, preschoolers, know how to get information. So I want you to read what, I'm not going to read these to you, I'll let you read them. This is some, you might recognize some of the names, what some of the experts are saying we need to focus on in education. And none of these people are associated with the International Baccalaureate. Now I'm going to give you a quiz. So you thought you were just going to come here and sit. So if you want to take some notes, just like you were in class, you can. If you want to be a 21st century learner, you could even snap some pictures with your phone. So read what these say, and then we're going to talk about them afterwards. And you can decide if this makes sense for you or not, if this is what you want for your students.
I have a question.
Oh, okay, thank you, I'm sorry about that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Okay, so it says, 21st century learners need cognitive strategies, which are patterns of intellectual behavior that lead to the development of mental processes and capabilities necessary for college-level work. These strategies include problem solving, research analysis, interpretation, reasoning, and precision and accuracy. Students must be able to think about the world in complex ways. Now I want you to think back to the learner profile, to the skills that we looked at, and see how that learner profile and skills connect. David Conley, by the way, is a big educator. He was one of the ones who really talked and moved with the Common Core in reevaluating what students need to be college ready. Some of you may recognize Thomas Friedman. His big book was The World is Flat. He said the most successful people in this century will be those who can acquire and use knowledge to develop and communicate creative combinations of ideas, applications, and strategies to solve problems. I want you to notice how often this notion of solving problems keeps coming up. Daniel Pink, he wrote A Whole New Mind and Drive are two of his most recent books. Students can no longer rely solely on their left brain skills for success in the 21st century. They also need to be able to design innovations, communicate through compelling stories, develop rapport with others, and synthesize seemingly disconnected pieces of information in new ways. Tony Wagner is out of the school in Harvard University. He's in the educational school in Harvard. And he has said that there are 7 critical skills that students today must have. They must have critical thinking and problem solving. They have to have collaboration skills so that they could work across networks and lead by influence. This is very interesting. They need agility and adaptability because information is changing so quickly. If you cannot adapt, you're going to be left behind. Initiative and entrepreneurialism. Kids need to know how to look and explore new ideas and see new solutions. Effective oral, written communication. They need to be able to speak and write clearly. Assessing and analyzing information, and especially they need curiosity and imagination. So you could be thinking about, is this what you would hope will be developed in your child? This might be the last or close to it. This is a list that they've put together of what are the 21st century skills. Problem solving. I told you you're going to see that a lot. Synthesizing across content areas. Interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary. Right? Interpersonal communication. Communication comes up and up. Search strategies. Do you know most kids, when they search Google, never get past the first page? And you know companies pay a lot of money to be on that first page? Some of the best information is beyond that first page, but the kids never get there. So how do they learn to really seek out the good information. Information credibility. We hear a lot about facts, fact-checking. How do they know if something that they hear really is true? Dealing with information overload. I certainly know that one. How to write for an online rather than print environment. Most of their communicating is done online. Computerized presentation skills, workspace, ergonomics, basic debugging, basic understanding of usability concepts, reflection, cross-cultural communication, and authentic listening. So with all of this, basically the summary, and that's what I use this for, is learning the content is what most of us were products of, where information was the end result. For your kids, information is not the end result, it's just the beginning. Okay? So this is a program designed to go beyond just information. Now, let's see how close you paid attention. If this was a school in the 20th century and I just presented all that information and you all took notes, I could say, go home tonight, which is what my teachers would say. Study your notes because tomorrow I'm going to give you a test. Does that sound familiar? You remember that? And you would go home and you'd make little flashcards and you'd memorize all the information and you'd read it back and study it because when you came in the next day you had a test that maybe looked like this. How is each century characterized from 18th through the 21st? That was the first slide. Could you tell me that? Okay, so you could do it in your head. You can keep mental. If you could do all four, you get 10 points. According to Daniel Pink, in addition to left brain skills, what were the 4 qualities that students need today? A little tougher. Told you should have taken notes, right? Because if you didn't, you probably are struggling with this question. You at least get one of them right. Yep. Good test taking. What were Tony Wagner's 7 skills? Okay. What important skill does Friedman, Conley, and Wagner all say? Okay. This would be a very typical 20th century test. We would add it all up, and like most 20th century tests, the magic total score was 100, right? Because then we could do something, because we knew if we got at least a 90, we'd all get what? An A. And then we'd get the star and we'd put it on the refrigerator, okay? This was what the focus of schooling was in the 20th century, memorizing information. IB's assessment system looks different, so I want to show you what it would look like versus that. This scale may be very familiar to many of you. Instead, I would now give you a copy of all the slides that I just presented. Because I don't care if you know the information, I want you to use the information. Okay? Or I would say, take out the notes that you took from the slides, or the pictures you took of the slides. And then I would ask you to do this. State at least 4 21st century competencies expressed by several authors. So you see, you still need to know something. Okay? That's the first part. But then I'm going to ask you to describe those skills. Then I'm going to ask you to explain why you think those skills are important. And then analyze to what extent you think students have those skills and justify why they need them. So let's do it together. And this is going to be scored differently. If you could state the skills, you get a 1-2. If you could describe them, you get into the second category. If you could explain, you get to the 5-6, and if you could analyze, you get the highest score. So knowing information in this system would score you what? What level? Say that again?
The basics.
The basic. This is simply knowing. This is what used to get us 100. But now you see it's the foundation. Because you can't do anything else if you don't know it. So let's pick the one that you said, problem solving. We saw that a lot, okay? So can we state it? We could state it. We got that one right. Now describe for me what problem solving is. What do you think when your kids have to solve problems, what do you want them to be able to do?
Identify first of all what the problem is.
Okay, very first step is can they even identify what the problem is? What else?
What the options are.
Very good. What are the multiple options? We look at multiple things. What else?
Try.
They try several. They experiment and actually do some. What else do you expect them to do when problem solving?
What does success look like?
What does success? Can they identify what does actual success mean? What else?
What
The solution makes sense.
Very good. Does my solution make sense? You just all did the second level. You described what problem solving looks like. So now we're up to at least a 4. Now, why do you think that's important for kids today? Why do they need that skill?
Because they already have the information at their fingertips, so they have to take it further.
All right. They've got the information, so we want to see what they could do for it. Why else is this an important skill?
Life's just a series of problems that you solve it most of the time.
That you just boiled it down, didn't you, right? Can you go through a day when you don't use those skills? Especially today. Okay? I didn't tell you I also own a gelato store back in Colorado. And I employ high school students. They're my #1 employees. And because I'm not there very often, I have to rely on them to solve problems. We, like many stores, our POS is on a tablet, and sometimes it doesn't work. I need to know they can problem solve it and fix it, because I'm not going to be there to do it for them. So the #1 skill that I look for when I hire them is, do they have those problem solving skills? Can they figure things out? Okay. So now analyze for me, what extent do you think students already have these skills? See, now analyzing is getting even higher. Because now to analyze, you're going to have to make connections. You're going to have to start giving the examples, right? We're going to go into a whole... So these get to very high levels. You were very good. We're at least a 6. And if we had lots of time, we could get into the analysis and we could see how many of you could get to the 7 or 8 level. But you see, each level required higher thinking. And that's what I want you to see with this illustration. That this is really a curriculum based on the depth of thinking and the depth of understanding. And what we're working with is to get kids to go all the way to the highest level. Because we know this is what they're going to have to be able to do in post-secondary. Okay? So I wanted to use that just as an illustration for what's different about it from, and that tells you right there what all. So justify, give valid reasons or evidence to support your answer.
So this is not a question, just a comment. On the way back to school today, I heard a comment by Bill Gates, and I don't know if you've already heard this on the news or on TV, but today he issued a challenge to all the presidential candidates and said, everybody's talking about the energy or this or that. My challenge to you is, what are we doing about creating students who can be effective in the 21st century? On the way here tonight, he said, what we need is to create a climate of kids, or kids who are problem solvers, who are innovative. He brought up Kennedy issuing the challenge of I'm going to land a man on the moon in the next 10 years, and bam, it was done. And he said, we have so much technology on hand. There is so, I mean, the whole world is open to our kids. We have to teach them to use it, and use it in a responsible way, and make that exciting for them, because the kind of job they're going to get is they're going to be problem solvers, no matter where they work, whether it's your gelato company or as an educator. And we challenge them to come out and say what they're going to do about education. It was really powerful. I guess he's written a blog about it, and he's getting great press about it. But today, you were
Very
in the
good.
airport. So you
Wow,
know.
yeah.
But I'm telling you,
I'm
because
gonna
I
look
was
for
like,
that. Yeah,
wow,
that's
I almost went through a red light. So it's good.
very
It's
good.
exciting.
And that's what I want you to see, is that the IB program is really taking all of the best thinking in education, and they have created a framework to help teachers get to what all we're being told and being challenged to do for our kids to be successful in the 21st century. They're not telling us what to teach. They're just making sure that whatever you teach, you need to get to these higher levels. You need to get kids to be analyzing and justifying